Good morning, friends. Anne here. Got my cup of coffee, got the Word of God, and today's reading is from Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. Friends, this is a passage that every time I read, I just have this constricting in my chest, and I just feel it in my bones. This is the passage about when Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac. Now, first, let me tell you a little bit about this story. So, Abraham and his wife Sarah had not had any children. They were over 100 years old when they finally gave birth to Isaac. He had been the promise that God had made to them. God said that you will have a son, and that through this son, I will create in your family line a huge big family. You will be the father of nations. And Abraham and Sarah did not see that come to pass until Isaac was born over 100 years later. But here's the thing that I want you guys to see is that in this passage, then we hear that God, who had made this promise of this child, of this baby, then came to Abraham and asked him to do something that seemed absolutely impossible. These are the first couple of verses in Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Friends, can you imagine what Abraham must have been thinking? What he must have been going through? I mean, at this point, Isaac was not a baby anymore. He was almost a full-grown man. He was probably in his later teens, maybe even early 20s. And Abraham had come to know him and come to care for him and love him and see him as the fulfillment of this promise that God had made. And here God is coming to him before he has fulfilled the promise, before he has made Abraham into this mighty nation. And he is saying to Abraham that Isaac will need to be sacrificed. Now, in this day, pagan gods would have demanded that from their followers, but Abraham thought that God was a different kind of God. But yet Abraham followed through. I can't even imagine the restless night that it was. And then Abraham packed everything up on his donkeys and they proceeded to go to Mount Moriah. He had some people there that were escorting them and that were taking care of all of their needs. And you can imagine just the mood as they walked up there. And he even had Isaac carry the wood that would be used for his own sacrifice. And then they get there, and Abraham doesn't chicken out, and Isaac doesn't try to rebel against his dad. Isaac trusts his dad, and Abraham trusts God. And he leaves all of the other people behind, and they walk up, and he ties Isaac to the altar. And then all of a sudden, as he is raising his hand with a knife, the voice of God calls down and says, "No, no, do not sacrifice him." And then God has provided a ram in a bush, in a thicket, for the sacrifice. And this is what happens. In verse 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." God renews his promise to Abraham after he sees that Abraham is not making an idol out of the first part of the promise. See, friends, sometimes when we begin to live into God's promises, when we begin to see them taking root in our lives, we hold on to those promises as if this is the very power and the very strength and the very one who has made this promise to us. We hold on to the tangible promise instead of holding on to the strength and the word of God, the one who did this for us. And God tested Abraham. He tested Abraham's heart. Are you putting your trust in Isaac, or are you putting your trust in me? And what we see is that Abraham had to let go of the partial fulfillment of the promise in order to receive the full fulfillment of the promise. Friends, this has happened in my life. God has made promises for me that I have held on to, that I didn't want to let go of. And then when I did, I was able to see the fullness of his promise come to pass in my life. So I would ask you, what promises has God made in your life? What promises has he begun to fulfill in your life? And are you holding on so tightly that you might miss the fullness of the promise? Friends, remember that sometimes we might need to give up the beginning of the promise so we can see the fulfillment of the process. Have a good day.